Alright, so in this video we're going to talk about setting up a game. That's going to include planning your game size, sharing your army list, then you're going to build battlefield. So you'll pick the deployment type, the secondary objective, the zones, the spells. Then you're going to go through and declare any special deployments and go through all the deployment phase. Alright, so let's talk about game sizes and lists. So it may seem obvious that, everybody normally plays the same game size. Well, when you're first starting out, I would say as learner games, you're best to do warband sizes. 1,000 points is really small and it doesn't start with a lot, so you may want to go a little more than that, but 1,000 points may be good for your first game. After you get the hang of it, 2,000 points is a really good starting point. And then just work your way up. And I feel like as the learner games go, if you take 500 or 1,000 point increments and get bigger and bigger, it'll help you just see how your whole army works together. And it definitely won't seem so overwhelming on your first couple games. Alright, so the typical game is going to be 4,500 points. I think in every country it's pretty much just been standardized to the 4,500 points for tournaments, and that's what everybody ends up playing locally. I like 5,000 point games if I'm not prepping for a tournament, but most of the time we're going to play the 4,500 just so everybody's going to be at the same points and it's a consistent list size. Now if you do want to play any great big games, that's where you're going to play the grand armies, and those can take a day, even 2-3 days, depends on how big a list that you put together. And then before you start your game, you are going to want to share your list. I typically suggest as you're building an army list, try to have an all-comers list, so you're not playing one list against this person with this army and another person with a different army. Try to make sure that you can work with one list and make sure that it can do well against most armies. Alright, so building the battlefield. I do think this is important, and you want to figure out what's going to be best for your club. What you're going to want to do is just agree on terrain and the placement, and you can do that a couple of ways. We have some terrain map packs through 9th Age, and those are my preferred method. Some of the tournaments put together their own map packs. You can use those. Or you could go through and randomize for terrain and the placement on it. And I would say mix up your terrain placement from game to game. If you're going to be playing Sylvan Elves, you're going to love woods, so you're going to want to see at least 2 woods on every board. If you're shooting Dwarf or other army, you're probably going to want to see a lot of hills. What I would say is, try to mix it up to where you're seeing different terrain pieces in different spots, so you don't always have a hill on this side and a wall right in the middle, and and the same thing over and over. It will make your game a lot better. So here's an example of a terrain map pack from 9th Age. And if you scroll down, you'll see that there's going to be a lot of different maps through this. They have a PDF, and it'll have different angles for the terrain. It does a nice job of mixing stuff up. And I suggest something like this, and if you can randomize and just say, I'm going to play this map or roll dice for it, that's probably the best way to go ahead and start planning your terrain placement. Alright, so for the deployment and the secondary objectives, what I suggest if you're just learning how to play Frontline Clash. That's going to be the 12 inches off the board. That's going to be our very standard deployment zone. And don't do any secondaries. It's going to be good just to go ahead and get the mechanics of the game and your army down before you really start adding more stuff. Now once you've got the basics of the game down, I strongly suggest you play secondaries once you have everything going, because the secondaries really do balance everything out, because gun lines become a lot tougher to take the secondary objectives, and there's armies that are going to do well with secondaries versus armies that won't. You'll start building armies that are meant to be able to handle secondaries so you don't lose games even though you won on points. So I think that they're a really important part of the game. I would just avoid those in the first 3 or 4 games that you play. And then I also suggest that you randomize both the deployment and the secondary objectives, because when you mix one secondary with a different deployment type, it completely changes how the game plays for army to army. So I would say, what we typically do is we're going to do a randomized dice where we just roll a d6 and then we pick them that way. Now the deployment types might change in the future, but for what we have currently that's supported by 9th Age, we have 1 which is Frontline Clash, 2 which is Dawn Assault, 3 is Counter Thrust, 4 is Encircle, 5 is Refuse Flank, and 6 is Marching Columns. And if you go down below this, what you'll see is they're all going to have a full description of how everything works, so go ahead and read those. Now what you also see below that is going to be the secondary objectives. So we have Hold Ground, Breakthrough, Spoils of War, King of the Hill, Capture the Flags, and Secure Target. So you see it's really easy to use a d6 to determine both the deployment and the secondary, because each of them have 6. Alright, so I probably should have showed you this page beforehand because this is where all the downloads are on Ninth Age. I will include a link to it in this video, just look below here. But on the download page on Ninth Age, if we come down, you can see you have the quick starter set, then we're going to have all the full books, and then all of the slim books for the armies that you can download, as well as all the rules packs. But what I wanted to show you here too, since we're talking about scenarios and map packs and things like that, is we're going to have the map pack that you can download, the terrain pack if you want to print them yourself. Here's where you get all of your spell cards and your flux cards. And then there's also an additional scenario supplement, and that's going to have a lot of scenarios other than just the 6 that I talked about a little bit ago. So I would say definitely come to the download page and make good use of everything they have here. There's a lot of stuff I don't think a lot of people realize are even here on the download for Gaming Aids. So once you have the battlefield down, you picked out your deployment and your secondary, now you're going to need to determine deployment zones. I see this done wrong with a lot of newer players, so I just want to make sure that I explain this correctly. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to roll a d6 for deployment zones. Whoever wins the d6 will be picking the deployment zone. They don't get to choose whether they go first or second. It's always going to be they pick which side or another. And if you can cut the board in a certain way, or if someone's deploying forward or backwards, the person that won the roll to pick sides is also going to determine that as well. Next, you need to do the spell selection, and that's going to be starting with the person who picked the deployment zone. A lot of times it's not going to matter. You're just going to choose the same spells you would have from army to army, but it may make a difference what someone is picking for their spells, what you want to pick, so make sure you do it in the correct order. And then what you're going to do is you're going to pick the spells for your apprentice, your adepts, and your masters. We'll get into it more later, but the apprentice knows one spell, and that's going to be the number 1 spell or the hereditary spell. Whereas an adept will know 2 spells, and that can be anywhere from 1 through 4, and the hereditary spell. And then wizard masters know any of the learned spells 1 through 6, or their hereditary spell. The next thing you need to do is declare if there's going to be any special deployments, and what we're talking about here is going to be scout or ambushing units, and we'll get into that more later, but you do need to let your opponent know that up front before they start deploying. Alright, so when you get into the deployment phase, first you're going to determine who deploys first. Now the player that didn't choose the deployment zone decides which player will deploy first. Then you're going to take turns deploying units, and they need to be completely within inside your deployment zone. And on each player's turn to deploy, you can deploy any number of units as long as you're deploying at least 1. Just so you know, all characters count as a single unit during the deployment phase, and they must be deployed during the same deployment turn. So essentially you're just putting all your characters down at the same time. It doesn't mean that you have to do them last, but if you want them to go in units, you need to make sure those units are down first. Now when I said earlier that you can deploy any number of units, that is true on most cases, but there are a few times where during the deployment you have to alternate for the first, say, 3. When you get into that, you'll see that. But for the most part, you can choose, I'm just going to deploy my whole army, or I'm going to go back and forth. I can deploy a couple. You really get to choose how you want to do that. Now, once a player has deployed all of their units, excluding anything that are going to be, ambushing or scout, then that player must announce whether they will play for first turn or second turn if they win the roll for the dice. Now, it could be that if you just deploy your entire army out, depending on the size, you'll automatically win. You won't even have to roll dice because you'll have that many bonuses. But once a player is fully deployed, they do have to say to the other player how they're going to be trying to go either first or second. Then the other player is going to deploy the rest of their units. And then what you're going to do is you're going to add up how many units they had left, including characters all count as 1, and that's going to be the bonus that the other player gets on the dice roll to see who gets to choose who goes first. Alright, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to deploy the scouts. And what you do with that is you're going to be starting with the player who first completed their normal deployment. So basically, if you deployed out first, then you're going to start with your first scouting unit, and then you'll alternate from there. Alright, so the next thing is going to be move vanguarding unit. So vanguards normally allow you to do a 12-inch move before the game starts. It could be different. I know there's some units that can only vanguard 6. But whatever you can vanguard, basically you're going to start vanguarding those, and the person who finished their deployment last is going to be the one that is going to vanguard first. And then if there's multiple vanguards, you're going to alternate on all the vanguarding. Now if you have any other rules or abilities or anything, you want to make sure that you go through those and you get those taken care of before you start the battle. And then finally you're just going to roll for the first turn. If say the person who deployed out was a +3, then they're going to be a +3 of their dice roll. So they'll both roll. Basically, whoever wins that dice roll is going to get their choice of whether they go first or second. Now I will say if it is a tie, then the player who finished deploying second actually is going to win that, because the person who finished deploying first actually has to beat the person who finished deploying second. Alright, and so next we're going to be on to actually starting the game. So on the next video we're going to start going over charge phase, movement phase, and how all of that works. And we'll get some models back on the board. I'll see you on the next video. Hi YouTube, this is Mike with Dark Wizard Gaming. Thanks so much for watching our How to Play 9th Age video series. Now if you did like the video, please use the like and subscribe feature below here, and feel free to leave any comments. And now if you have questions about how the game works or any rules questions, I would strongly suggest you go to the 9th Age forum and actually post on there. They're going to have a full team, and there's a community there to help you with any rules questions. If you do comment here, I will answer your questions, but it may take a week or two before I get back with you, whereas if you go to the 9th Age forums, you'll get answers right away. So enjoy your 9th Age gaming. Thanks.